want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are packing for a highly anticipated romantic getaway.
Right, the kind you've been waiting months for.
Exactly. But then your partner sits you down and gives you some pretty intense ground rules. First, you are to bring absolutely nothing with you.
Nothing at all.
Nothing. Second, you're going to a place so incredibly remote that you shouldn't expect to have any cell phone service.
Which is already a huge red flag.
Oh, absolutely. And third, and this is the absolute kicker here, you have to start this romantic trip by sneaking out of your workplace and hiding under a dark tarp in the bed of his pickup truck.
It honestly sounds like the start of a horror movie.
It really does.
Yeah.
But for a 29-year-old woman named Patricia Adkins, or Patti, this wasn't some dark hypothetical scenario. In her mind, climbing into that truck bed was, supposed to be the start of a brand new, beautiful life.
Yeah.
So welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to unpack one of the most baffling and really just frustrating unsolved mysteries in Ohio history, the 2001 disappearance of Patti Adkins. And our goal today isn't just to walk you through that timeline of events. We want to analyze the underlying mechanics of this case. Like, how does a smart, highly responsible single mother walk willingly into what seems, with the benefit of hindsight, like a glaringly obvious trap?
Exactly.
And we need to look at the forensics and the law to understand why a mountain of circumstantial evidence just hasn't been enough to put the prime suspect behind bars for over 2 decades now.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, to understand the mechanism of that trap, we really have to start with Patti herself.
Yeah.
Because the psychology of what happened, it only makes sense when you look at her baseline behavior.
Right, who she was before all of this.
Exactly. So Patti was 29, a devoted single mother to a 7-year-old daughter, and she worked at the Honda of America manufacturing plant in Marysville, Ohio.
And she had been there a long time, right?
Yeah, nearly 10 years. She had worked her way up to a shift supervisor, and by all accounts, she was the supervisor who always stayed late. She would make sure her assembly line was flawlessly clean before she even thought about clocking out.
So not exactly someone who makes reckless, impulsive decisions.
Not at all. Highly responsible.
Which really makes her secret life all the more jarring. Because within the walls of that massive factory, Patti was having a long-term affair with a married coworker.
Right. And in the online sleuth communities, he's often referred to as Brian, though law enforcement and news outlets usually just call him the boyfriend or the coworker.
Yeah, and we'll keep it to that to stay focused on the facts of the case.
Yeah.
So he was married, he had kids, but he had promised Patti that he was going to leave his wife so the two of them could start a new life together.
And he backed up that promise with a massive financial request, which is really what bound them together. Over the course of a year or two, Patti loaned this man approximately $90,000.
Okay, I want to stop and just look at the sheer logistics of that $90,000. Because you don't just walk to an ATM and withdraw that kind of cash.
No, especially not on a factory supervisor's salary.
Right. It requires a tremendous amount of sustained effort and paperwork. She completely liquidated her 401k, which means paying those early withdrawal penalties. She sold her company's stock.
She even went through the entire appraisal and approval process to take out a second mortgage on her home.
Yeah, so this wasn't one momentary lapse in judgment. This was hundreds of deliberate financial steps, all driven by absolute trust in this guy.
And the lie he used to secure that trust was highly calculated. According to what Patti confided to her sister and her friends, he told her he needed the cash to secretly buy out his brother-in-law's share of a side business, a mechanic shop.
Okay, so why did it have to be a secret?
Well, the logic he spun was that if he used cash, there'd be no paper trail. He told her he wanted to protect this major asset from his wife in the impending divorce proceedings.
Wow.
Yeah, he basically sold it as ensuring that he and Patti would have a business to fall back on once they were finally together.
Okay, let's unpack this with a concept from economics. The sunk cost fallacy. This is when you continue a behavior as a result of previously invested resources, whether that's time, money, or effort, even when it stops making logical sense.
Which perfectly describes Patti's situation here.
Exactly. Patti had invested her entire financial foundation and really her whole heart into this man. When you're down to $0 in your retirement account and you have a second mortgage on your house, you literally cannot afford for the relationship to be a lie.
Because if she admits he's manipulating her, she doesn't just lose the love of her life.
Right. She has to face the reality of absolute financial ruin. At what point do you stop seeing the red flags because you're in too deep?
And that psychological pressure cooker is exactly what kept her compliant for so long. But, a pressure cooker eventually vents. The catalyst for this entire tragedy traces back to a conversation they had in February of 2001.
The repayment deadline.
Yes. Patty told him that her own repayment schedules for those loans and that second mortgage were starting to kick in. She told him point blank she would need him to start paying the $90,000 back in July.
And just like that, the suspect is totally backed into a corner.
Exactly. Because Patty set that July deadline, his timeline suddenly compressed. He needed an immediate massive distraction to buy himself time before she realized the money was gone and, the business buyout was a complete lie.
Which brings us to the Canadian vacation.
Right. That desperation birthed the fake vacation, perfectly timed for the Honda plant's scheduled summer shutdown at the end of June.
So to distract from the missing 90 grand, he pitches this romantic week away, just the two of them, in a remote cabin in Canada. But the rules he lays out for this trip, like we mentioned at the start, are completely bizarre.
Yeah, they really are.
He tells her the cabin is so remote that cell phones won't work. He tells her not to pack a bag because they'll just buy everything they need once they cross the border. And the escape route from the factory, I mean, that is the most alarming part to me.
The tarp.
Yeah. He tells her he has to give another coworker a ride home that night. So, to keep their affair a secret from this passenger, she needs to run out of the plant, climb into the bed of his pickup truck, and hide under a brand new tonneau cover.
A dark, hard truck bed cover.
Right. And she's supposed to just hide under there until he drops the other guy off.
The level of control he is exerting here is profound. He is systematically stripping away her access to communication, her personal belongings, and even her physical visibility.
I'm sorry, but I have to push back hard on this. We're talking about an intelligent, organized factory supervisor. How does any of this pass the smell test?
It's hard to grasp from the outside, I know.
Like just the logistics of the shopping. How do you go on a massive shopping spree to buy a week's worth of clothes in a location so remote that a cell phone won't even find a signal? Are they going to an outpost trading post to buy a week's worth of wilderness gear?
Probably not.
And why would an adult woman agree to ride under a dark, cramped tarp like contraband? It clearly signals that he simply didn't want any witnesses seeing her leave with him.
It is incredibly easy to spot the trap from the outside. But you have to look at the psychology of coercive control and isolation here. He had spent years grooming her to accept secrecy as just a necessary part of their romance.
Because he was still married.
Right. He conditioned her to believe that sneaking around was actively protecting their future. To Patty, riding under a tarp wasn't a red flag. It was just one final uncomfortable hurdle before her secret life finally became her real life.
That is so incredibly tragic.
It really is, and yet she did silently rebel against his rules in one small, heartbreaking way. Despite him saying, bring absolutely nothing, she packed a small teal duffel bag.
Yeah, she packed her ID and a piece of blue Victoria's Secret lingerie.
She wanted the trip to be special.
She really did. She had boarded her pets at the kennel. She arranged for her sister Marcia to watch her 7-year-old daughter. She even got a friend to drive her to work that day so her car wouldn't be sitting in the Honda parking lot all week. She was doing everything right to prepare for a real vacation.
And the plant records confirm her final moments. At exactly 12 o'clock and 19 seconds a.m., so just 19 seconds after midnight on June 29th, Patty clocked out.
Which was unusual for her, right?
Very. Her coworkers noted she uncharacteristically rushed out of the factory. She didn't stay to clean up her line like she always did. She practically ran out into the night, and she was never seen again.
The terrifying brilliance of this Canadian vacation lie is that it engineered a massive head start. I mean, Patty's family wasn't panicked for an entire week because they thought she was off the grid, blissfully happy.
Right. It was deliberately structured to look like a voluntary vacation. That gave the suspect over a week of absolute silence to clean up.
But that vacuum of silence ends on Sunday, July 8th. Because Patty was scheduled to pick up her daughter from her sister Marcia at noon. When she didn't show up and wasn't answering her home phone, Marcia started to worry.
Understandably.
Yeah. And by late afternoon, that worry turned to panic. And Marcia called the boyfriend's house.
And the boyfriend answers. Marcia asks about Patty, and he completely stonewalls her. He denies knowing her, claims they never had an affair, and just hangs up.
But Marcia's terrified at this point. So at 3 in the morning, she calls back. And this time, the suspect's wife answers the phone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Marcia just unloads. She exposes the entire affair, the secret trips, the $90,000. The wife is completely blindsided. And then the boyfriend takes the phone from his wife.
And what happens next is a fascinating psychological chess match. He doesn't hang up on Marcy again. He keeps her on the line for 45 minutes.
Which is an eternity for a phone call at 3 in the morning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It wasn't a conversation. It was an interrogation. He's pumping Marcia for information, trying to gauge his own exposure. He needs to know exactly what Marcia knows, what Patti told her, what physical proof the family might have.
Right.
And in that 45-minute window, he realizes that Patti didn't keep the secret like she promised. She had told her sister the entire plan.
So the police get involved immediately. They pull him in, and he gives them his alibi for the night of June 29th. He claims he left the plant, got in his truck with the coworker he was giving a ride to, and they drove toward Kenton, Ohio, which is about 30 miles away.
Okay.
He says they stopped at a Burger King, waited in the drive-thru line for 45 minutes, and then he dropped the guy off and went home. His wife corroborated the back end of the story, saying he pulled into their driveway at 2:30 a.m. and spent the entire holiday week at home pouring a concrete slab. Not in Canada.
But police investigators immediately saw the geographical and temporal flaws in this alibi. I mean, it simply does not take 2.5 hours to drive 30 miles, drop someone off, and drive home, even late at night.
Right.
The investigators actually went to that specific Burger King in Kenton and interviewed the manager. They wanted to know if a 45-minute wait at midnight was even possible.
And what did the manager say?
The manager definitively stated that their drive-through line never backs up for 45 minutes at that hour. It was clearly a fabricated delay designed to account for missing time.
It's just an absurd lie. 45 minutes for a burger in rural Ohio at midnight. But what I find even more perplexing is the coworker in the passenger seat. When questioned, he corroborated the boyfriend's timeline. Why would this guy back up such a specific, easily disprovable lie?
That is one of the most debated elements among internet sleuths studying the case files. If we analyze the theories, there are really a few possibilities. Was the coworker just asleep in the passenger seat, completely unaware of how much time passed or where they stopped, and he just agreed with the timeline presented to him later?
Like he just didn't want to get involved?
Right. Or was there manipulation involved? Some theorize the suspect held some kind of leverage over him, maybe a promised promotion, a workplace union favor, or just sheer intimidation. But without the coworker breaking his silence or changing his story, police hit a wall with the alibi itself.
So what does this all mean? The broken alibi, combined with Marcia's testimony about the money, was finally enough to give police probable cause to execute search warrants on the boyfriend's property. And this brings us to an incredibly frustrating standoff between forensic science, physical evidence, and legal thresholds.
Yeah, it gets complicated here.
Let's start with the tonneau cover, the truck bed cover Patty's supposedly hid under.
So police found that he bought the cover on June 26th, just days before the Canadian trip was supposed to happen. He installed it on his truck the very morning of the day Patti vanished.
But when police came looking for it,
It wasn't on his truck. He had removed it right after she was reported missing on July 8th and hid it in the attic of his mechanic shop.
and when forensic teams tested it, they found two massive pieces of evidence. First, cat hair, which a veterinarian matched specifically to Patty's cats.
Wow.
And second, a microscopic drop of blood on the underside of the cover.
And here is where the limitations of forensic science really come into play. The police used what is called a presumptive test on that drop. A presumptive test relies on a chemical reaction, often phenolphthalein, which reacts to the peroxidase-like activity of hemoglobin in blood.
Right, the stuff that turns pink.
Exactly. If it turns pink, it indicates the substance is highly likely to be blood. But a presumptive test doesn't tell you whose blood it is.
For that, you need a confirmatory DNA test.
Yeah.
But they didn't run one. Why?
Because of the sample size. To get a DNA profile from a microscopic drop, forensic scientists use a process called PCR, or polymerase chain reaction. PCR uses chemical enzymes to break open the cells and amplify the DNA strands so they can be read. But that extraction and amplification process physically consumes the biological material. If they ran the test with the technology available at the time, the sample would be entirely destroyed.
So if it failed, it's just gone.
Gone forever. If the test failed, or the results were mixed, the evidence would be lost. So investigators made the strategic decision to preserve the drop, leaving it untested for over 2 decades, waiting for DNA technology to advance to a point where they can profile it without consuming it entirely.
That is just excruciating. But they found more than just the truck cover. They searched the house of this man who claimed on the phone that he barely knew Patti Adkins. Inside, they found a Hard Rock Cafe shirt and a Harley-Davidson phone that Patty's friends confirmed she had purchased for him.
They even found a passionate love letter she wrote him.
Yeah, And he admitted to investigators that he destroyed a birthday card she gave him so his wife wouldn't find it. Oh, and he also did a polygraph test and failed it.
Which brings us to the most visceral part of the search, the concrete slab. During the search of his property, law enforcement brought in cadaver dogs. These dogs are highly specialized. They are trained specifically to detect the scent of human decomposition, completely ignoring animal remains or other scents.
And what happened?
During the sweep, the dogs they signaled a positive, aggressive alert on the newly poured concrete slab at his home. The very slab he spent the factory shutdown week pouring instead of being in Canada.
So the police did exactly what you would expect. They brought in heavy machinery, demolished the concrete, and excavated the ground underneath. But they found absolutely nothing. No body, no clothing, no evidence. If the body wasn't under the concrete, why did highly trained cadaver dogs alert on it?
So this is where we have to look at the chemistry of scent transfer, a theory heavily discussed by forensic experts and internet sleuths analyzing the case. Cadaver dogs don't actually smell a physical body. They smell volatile organic compounds, or VOCs.
Which are gases released during decomposition.
Exactly. The leading theory is that the suspect may have used a specific shovel or piece of heavy equipment to bury her in a remote area. The VOCs from the decomposition process bound to the porous metal or rust of that tool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then he brought that exact same tool back to his house and used it to mix or spread the wet concrete for his patio.
Wait, so the scent transferred from the shovel into the concrete mixture itself?
Yes. Those organic compounds can actually survive the chemical curing process of wet concrete. The dogs weren't alerting to a body underneath the slab. They were alerting to the molecular scent of decomposition mixed into the surface of the concrete itself.
Okay, as a listener, you are probably asking yourself how this is possible. How can a prosecutor look at all of this? A failed polygraph, a clear $90,000 financial motive, cat hair matching her pets, a hidden truck cover with blood on it, an easily broken Burger King alibi, hidden romantic gifts, and cadaver dogs hitting on a fresh concrete slab and not make an arrest. How is this man still walking free?
This raises an important question about legal thresholds. It comes down to a fundamental legal concept called corpus delicti, which literally translates to the body of the crime.
Right.
It is a principle that requires the state to prove a crime actually occurred before someone can be convicted of committing it. Historically, in murder cases, the easiest way to prove corpus delicti is to produce a body.
But they don't have one here.
Exactly. Without a body, without a murder weapon, and without conclusive DNA matching Patti to that truck cover, the physical evidence of a murder is entirely circumstantial.
But circumstantial evidence is still evidence, right? What about the cat hair? The lies?
A defense attorney's job is to introduce reasonable doubt, and with circumstantial evidence, alternative explanations are just too easy to manufacture. They would argue in court, cat hair transfers easily, maybe she brushed against him in the break room at the factory.
And the hidden gifts?
They'd say she was an obsessed coworker who forced gifts on him, and he hid them so his wife wouldn't get the wrong idea.
And the broken alibi?
He was out having a beer somewhere else and didn't want his wife to know he was out late, so he made up the Burger King story.
So the prosecution is just afraid of losing.
They are terrified of the concept of double jeopardy. In the United States legal system, if the state tries a defendant for murder and a jury acquits them because the evidence is too circumstantial, double jeopardy attaches.
Meaning they can't try him again?
Right. The state can never try him again for that exact crime. Even if a hiker stumbles across Patti's remains the very next day, or the suspect writes a full confession, he is legally untouchable. The prosecution only gets one shot at this, so they refuse to pull the trigger until they have an airtight case.
So they are stuck in this agonizing holding pattern. They're waiting for someone's conscience to break, or for a hunter to find something in the woods, or for PCR DNA technology to evolve just enough to test that microscopic blood drop without destroying it.
And that waiting takes a devastating toll on Patti's family. To bring us back to the present, Patti Adkins was declared legally dead in 2006.
That's so sad.
It is. If she were alive, she would be 52 years old today. Her daughter, who was 7 when she was left with her aunt, has had to grow up without her mother, living her entire life with the heavy burden of just not knowing where she is.
But there is forward momentum. There is a standing $25,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. And recently, the Union County Prosecutor's Office assigned a fresh investigator full-time to review Patti's case from top to bottom.
Which is huge.
Yeah, they are putting a fresh set of eyes on the massive case files, looking for any technological advancements or overlooked connections that could finally tip the scales of probable cause.
It means law enforcement hasn't closed the book. They haven't forgotten her.
I want to leave you with something to really mull over, something that bridges the gap between a true crime case and our everyday lives. Think about your own workplace. Think about the people you sit next to, the people you share the break room with. We spend 40 hours a week with our coworkers.
We really do.
We complain about management together, we share details about our weekends, and we walk away feeling like we genuinely know who they are.
Yeah.
Patti Adkins spent 10 years at her job. She was a respected supervisor. She built an entire secret life, a dream of a future, with someone standing right next to her on the assembly line.
Yeah.
And she vanished into thin air because she trusted the wrong person with her deepest hopes and her entire life savings. It really makes you wonder, how well do we truly know the people standing right next to us?
It's a sobering reality. We often project the narrative we want to see onto the people we interact with every day, completely ignoring the complexities of who they might actually be when the shift ends.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the details, keep exploring the evidence, and keep your eyes open. Because somewhere out there, a mother is still missing. And someone knows exactly why she climbed under that tarp and never came out.